Good afternoon. I'm Chasity Craft. I'm the literacy consultant here at KVAC, and I'm going to be talking about some reading and writing strategies that you guys can do with your kids to increase student comprehension. So, the learning intentions for today is you're going to be introduced to the 5 components of reading. We're going to develop a routine for selecting vocabulary words to teach for your kids. You're going to acquire steps to strengthen your vocabulary instructional routine, and then you're going to take those vocabulary words and be able to help students apply those words to their writing. So we're going to look at the 5 components of reading. You're going to have a routine on how to select vocabulary words to teach the students. And then after you've got those selected, we're going to go over and talk about how to teach those words. And then after they learn the words, then we're going to be able to apply those to their student writing. The National Reading Panel has done some research, and they have from 2000 actually, and they I mean, that's 20 years old, but it still holds true today for the concepts of literacy. So they have developed 5 concepts of literacy, and it's referred to as the 5 pillars. And what that does is those, as our visual here, it is the foundation for students to have in order to have the understand what they read, because that is really our overall goal. So when you're planning instruction for your students, you want to make sure that you have they've either mastered the one of these 5 concepts, or that you have addressed it in your reading lesson. Those are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and then comprehension. And each of those, just they build on each other, just kind of like your math concepts, and everything, all those foundational pieces that they get when they're younger, it builds on, so that they can have those skills and be able to have the overarching goal, which is being able to read and comprehend at a higher level. So what do those components mean? So very quickly, looking at phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is just the ability to identify the sounds that make up the speech. So this is before you get to the written word. You're not even looking at the written word yet. It's just for them to be able to hear those sounds. So like, for example, if you have the word cat, then they don't necessarily, if they have phonemic awareness, they don't know that it's CAT, but they do understand that they are hearing the k, at, that they could hear each of those sounds. So being able to hear that is having phonemic awareness. Some things that you can do to build that concept is rhyming games, tongue twisters, reading aloud, like Dr. Seuss books is really good, because getting that rhyming in so they could hear those sounds. And those are all examples of doing phonemic awareness. Then that leads to your next one of phonics. Phonics helps kids match that sound with the written letter. So that letter sound association is phonics, knowing that cat, I hear k at. And also those sounds that I hear is represented by C-A-T. So being able to write and read C-A-T is cat is having that concept of phonics, and they use that concept to decode those words, to looking at those letters, knowing the sounds of those letters, and being able to blend those sounds together to form words. That is phonics. Then that leads to your next one, which is fluency. And fluency is the ability to read accurately and quickly. And so you're decoding words at phonics. And I'm sure all of you guys have seen kids and they try to read and they're sounding out every single word in that sentence. And that's awesome that they can do that. So they have developed that phonics. They can use that to decode those words, but they're not really reading it fluently. So for example, if they had the sentence, Tom ran home, then if they have to sound out Tom, ran, home. That's phonics, but that's not fluency. Fluency would be, they would be able to look at it and say, Tom ran home, and being able to read with expression and just let it, like you're talking, and that kind of thing. That is the example of fluency. And then it leads to vocabulary. So vocabulary is the key of knowing about everything, really, because you may have kids, and I've seen it myself. You have a kid that can read the dictionary, read every word in the dictionary, but if they don't understand those big words that they are reading, if they don't even know what that means, then they're not going to get that comprehension. Yeah, I can read those words, but if I don't know what the word pollinate means, or if I don't know what fertilizer means, then even though I can read that sentence, I don't even know what I'm talking about. So understanding those key vocabulary words is critical to the comprehension piece, which leads into the next component of comprehension. So once a child is reading fluently, they have a strong vocabulary, then they have a true meaning of understanding what they read. And having these four other pieces, having that foundation and knowing those components is the key to increasing the student comprehension and have them reading and comprehending at a higher level, at grade level is our goal, and then our ultimate goal will be when they graduate high school to be able to do that in their day-to-day lives and be able to survive and be read and know what they're wanting to find out. And one thing about comprehension, we hear comprehension strategies and things like that, but what we want to talk about just a little bit is comprehension is the outcome of what we want students to do, not the strategy. So being able to read the words accurately and fluently and understand the meaning of the words using their background knowledge, that is a key concept as well. And then being able to focus their attention on the critical content. And what that means is if they're reading a passage about photosynthesis in the science class, there's a lot of information sometimes when they read that. So they have to be able to pick out what they need to know that's important for them to understand the concept of what photosynthesis is. And then, of course, that background knowledge of them knowing about that process is also going to help them comprehend. So we're going to, you have different strategies to increase comprehension, but the comprehension itself is not a strategy, it's the outcome. And this is our Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. This is our comprehension goal. And I wanted to share this with you to show you how what the strategies that you're doing ties into the Kentucky Academic Standards. When we're working with kids, we have to, they have to meet those standards. And then also with kids, if they have, IEPs, or if they're struggling and not on grade level, then you also have to get them meet their IEP goals, catch them up, and while at the same time tying it into the Kentucky Academic Standards, which could be very challenging at times. But I do wanted to show this to you because it is reading standard 10. And if you notice, I don't have a grade level on it. And it's because this goal is exactly the same for every single grade level, which is pretty cool because, like I said, the overall goal is to comprehend. So the standard reads, by the end of the year, flexibly use a variety of comprehension strategies such as questioning, monitoring, visualizing, inferencing, summarizing, using prior knowledge, and determining importance to read, comprehend, and analyze grade level appropriate, complex literary text independently and proficiently. Now that's a lot of information in that one sentence. So, but basically what that means is they're going to use those examples of questioning, monitoring, etc. Those are the strategies that you're going to help teach. And those strategies that they're going to learn is going to help those students take a grade level text, read it independently and fluently, and comprehend it and be able to break it down and apply it to whatever they need to apply it to. So that's our ultimate goal. Did you know that vocabulary is the most important single factor in accounting for reading comprehension? Um, and it's also this, and this is based on some research that we had. Read the extent of the student's vocabulary knowledge directly relates to their comprehension. So, like we mentioned before, the more vocabulary words that they know, then it's going and the more difficult words that they know and the concepts, and they're going to be able to read and to comprehend at a higher level because they're understanding what they read. So that's why that I chose vocabulary today to help with that, because of this research. I think this will help you get more bang for your buck with your kids, to increase their vocabulary. So essentially, a more expansive vocabulary is going to equal a higher level of comprehension for your kids. So now that takes us into the vocabulary selection routine. So when you're designing a lesson, it's so important to spend that time reviewing the words in the unit. So for example, if you're in a classroom, and this could be any content, it could be math class, it could be reading class, science, social studies, wherever you are, every unit or new story that you have, there's a list of vocabulary words that they give at the beginning of the lesson. A lot of times they will have, sometimes they could have 15 or 20 vocabulary words for the students to know. So what you need to do is, we know that our students are not going to be able to know all 15 or 20. So we need to narrow that down and decide which ones that we can choose for them. So that's what we're going to talk about. And it's and those are going to be different based on your kids. This little cake here is just a visual that talks about vocabulary words. We categorize words into 3 tiers: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 vocabulary words. Tier 1 words are words that you would use in everyday conversation. For example, come, happy, table. Students are going to, if they are engaged in conversation, then they are going to pick up on those type of words that we use every single day. So those are the type of words that you don't need to spend your instructional time going over those and talking about the definition of those, because they would already know those, which is important. Going back to the conversation piece, it's important to talk to your kids, engage them in conversation, and use those words that that they may not know. But if you talk to them and use those bigger words, then that's going to help with their vocabulary. Then we move into tier 2. Those are high frequency words that are used across different contexts, but they're not really necessarily as easy as what we had talked about in the tier 1. The tier 2 words increase that comprehension for them, and it may be the ones that should be taught because they're going to be used across all settings. You may learn a tier 2 word, the definition and the meaning of a certain word in reading class, but then they may go to math class and hear that word in a different context, but they still want to know what that means. Or they go to Walmart and they run into one of their buddies and they're talking, and their buddy, so they can use that in everyday life and in the future. Then that moves to tier 3 words. Tier 3 words are categorized as low frequency. And what that means is it's limited to that specific domain. So for example, if you're in science class and the word, like I used earlier, like photosynthesis, Well, you're probably not going to hear that word unless you are in science class or talking something about science. It's not going to be in everyday conversation. Or words like continent or atom. Those are content specific words. Those are, they may need to be taught in order for a child to understand that particular lesson, but those are not going to be used as frequently in the child's everyday life. So that's how we categorize those and determine their use. Okay, so just 4 little steps in thinking about the selection. Like I had mentioned earlier at the beginning of units or stories, sometimes they will give you 15 to 20 words. And our kids have a very difficult time being able to decide what's important and try to just process all of that. So we want to limit the number of words given to 4 or 5 per session. And some people may ask that, why not do 10 or more? And, students just can't comprehend. Some students, and more than likely the students that we work with, are just not able to comprehend that many words. So if you break it down to 4 to 5 per session, you would be doing that student more, helping that student more, giving them 4 or 5 words and ensuring that they know those 4 or 5 as to try to present 10, and they may walk away knowing 2 of them. So that's the concept of that. It's just easier for them and it's more beneficial for them. And that's the hardest one, I think, is to limit, because you look at them and you think, oh, that's important, and they are, but it's just very difficult to limit those. But that is something that's very, very important to just decide to do. Step 2, this one may seem obvious, select words that are unknown. And what that means is, like, sometimes, again, the curriculum will suggest words in a story, and maybe if you're in 4th grade, and some of the words might be secret as a vocabulary word. Well, by 4th grade, more than likely, all students have an understanding of what the word secret means. So you don't want to use secret as one of your vocabulary words, because they probably at least have an idea of what that means. And also, you don't want to waste your instructional time on a word that they already know. You want to shift that time to words that they don't know. So select words that are unknown to them. And again, you may be working with 3 or 4 students, and you may have 3 or 4 different vocabulary. Each student may have a different list of words, because of course it depends on your students, of course. And then step 3 is select words that are critical to the passage understanding. So for example, that kind of goes along when we talked about the tier 3. So sometimes you will have to use some of those tier 3, those content specific words, in order for them to understand what they're talking about. So if they are in science class and they are talking about photosynthesis, that's probably going to have to be one of those vocabulary words, because if they don't know what that means, then they're going to just miss the whole lesson. So you will have to consider how important those words would be to help that student comprehend the lesson being taught and to keep them engaged in the lesson. And then lastly, select words that can be used in the future. And that's what I was talking about, like with the tier 2 words. Those are words that are a little bit difficult. That's going to help them with the understanding of the unit or the story, but then also they could take that knowledge that they've learned for that lesson and use it in the future and in their everyday life. So your focus, you want to focus mostly on those tier 2 words when selecting vocabulary. And then, but like I said, sometimes you do have to pick words that's critical to that passage understanding, so that they can get the lesson or the task at hand. Okay, so now we've went through and you have reviewed the vocabulary words. You've looked at them and you narrowed it down and you have decided which ones that your student needs. So you've got your selection, and now it's time to teach it. So now we're going to talk about the instructional routine on how to teach these words that you have selected. So you essentially have 4 steps in your routine. Step 1 is you're going to introduce the word, and we're going to go through I'm going to model each one of these steps separately, but I wanted you just to kind of see all 4 steps together before we move into them. Step 1 is to introduce the word's pronunciation, and step 2 is introduce the meaning. So you're going to tell them what the word is, you're going to tell them what the word means, and step 3 is illustrate with examples and non-examples, and then step 4 is check for the student understanding. So simply put, you're going to tell them what the word is, you're going to tell them what it means, you're going to give an example of what it is and what it is not, and then you're going to check and see if they got it, see if they know it. Okay, so step 1. So we're going to go into these a little bit more in depth. Step 1, introduce the word's pronunciation. You're going to display the word, and we're going to just, for an example, we're just going to use the word enemy. So you're going to have the word, you can put it on the board, a whiteboard, on a sheet of paper, on the table, wherever, it does not matter. And you're going to say, this is the word enemy. Say it with me, enemy. And you have the kids say it with you, and then you say it, and you repeat that word several times. Have them say it again, and say it again until everybody or the student can say that word correctly. If you cannot pronounce the word correctly, you're not going to know what it means, and you're not going to be able to read it, and you're not going to be able to know it. So that is very important. The word is enemy. What is the word? Enemy. Next, you're going to show the visual cue for the student. So which the visual cue right now is the actual word itself. So this is going to be displayed, spelled out however you want to do it on the board or whatever. They repeat it, the visual cue of the word. And the next is you're going to break it apart into syllables. We call it scooping. We're going to scoop the syllables. Okay. Now, this could be done if you had the word up on a whiteboard or board or sheet of paper. You are going to take your pen, and you're like we have on the screen here, and you're going to draw and separate and scoop each of those syllables, and you're going to say them as you draw. In me, in me, and they can see you, that visual of scooping, and that helps them break it apart. It helps with the pronunciation. Also, after you do that, then another one is they could clap it, and you get that movement in there. In me, in me. Then you in me, and you blend it, and you blend it, and so you do that until they get it. So that's one. So now they can pronounce the word. They know how to say this word, enemy. Step 2 is introduce the word's meaning. Now, when you give a definition for a word for students, you want to put it in a student-friendly definition. For today's purposes, for you guys, I did put up a dictionary definition, and I did that just to kind of show you why it is important to give them a student-friendly definition. So if you were doing enemy, then you would say an enemy is someone who hates you or does not like you and wants to harm you. I mean, that pretty much, if you tell any student that, they're going to understand the concept of what that means. If you tell them to go look it up in the dictionary, which I know, and not that it's anyone's fault, but some, in school, sometimes if you ask what a word means, and you were told to go look it up in the dictionary, which teaches dictionary skills. But what if they looked it up and it said one that is antagonistic to one another? So let's think about that for just a second. If the child does not know what enemy means, do you think they're going to know what the word antagonistic means? Probably not. So that's why you want to put it in student-friendly terms, because you don't want them to try, once they look up definitions, yeah, and you know what? You might have a kid that could read it, they could read one that is antagonistic to one another, and they could probably copy it down, if they're having to write words and definitions, but are they going to even know what that means? No, they will not. So that's why it's important to give them that student-friendly definition to help with their comprehension. Another thing that's important in helping with the understanding the meaning is looking at word parts. And this is kind of fun. I actually love this activity. If you can break a word apart with your suffixes and prefixes and know that that they have meanings, you can put those meanings together. It's like a puzzle piece. It's pretty cool. So obviously, when you are working with that, you can have you would want to present with them a list of meanings to help them. But for example, let's look at the word disgusting. Okay, with disgusting, you had the prefix of dis, which means either not, apart, away, or reversal, one of those. Gust means flavor or taste. And then your suffix ing means belonging to or act of doing or a present part. So if they didn't know what disgusting means and you gave them the meanings of those word parts, then they could probably piece together and say, okay, belonging to the taste, but then this is not. So belonging to the taste or the act of doing the taste, but not, or they probably not like the taste. So disgusting probably means you do not like the taste. So that they can work through that and be able to dissect and come up with words that they don't know. So that leads us to our step 3, which is illustrate with examples and non-examples. So the first thing that, if possible, is to give what we call a concrete example. And what that is something that they could actually hold, something tangible. That's not always feasible when you're given a word like enemy. You can't hold an enemy. But if you were doing something like broccoli, if they didn't know what broccoli was, then you could actually bring in broccoli, let them hold it, look at it, and that's a concrete example of what that word is. But like I said, you don't always have that with all words, but if possible, that's what you want to start with. Then you also have a visual cue, which now that we do have with enemy, which are the pictures that I have here. So I have given, you have a cat and a dog, and then you have the war here of 2 different groups fighting each other, and then of course just those little people. So that gives them 3 examples of what enemies might look like. So now they have this visual. Okay, that's what this looks like. They're fighting against each other. They don't really like each other. Okay, I can get this. Then you want to give them some verbal cues. So you can say, and again, when you give examples, you want to make sure, going back to that background knowledge, make sure that if you say the wolf is the enemy of the 3 little pigs, that the kids are aware of that story. They may not, because if they don't know that story, then that's not going to help them. So you want to just that's why it's important, which I know you guys already know this, to know your kids and know kind of what they are into and things like that. And then you can say, okay, another example of enemy is the Grinch is the enemy of Christmas. Okay, and then the wicked stepmother is the enemy of Cinderella. And you can just pull any examples like that. Then you want to give them non-examples. So for example, Frog and Toad are not enemies. And again, if they're not familiar with that story, don't use that one. Bert and Ernie are not enemies. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother are not enemies. So those are you're giving them examples of what enemies are and what enemies are not. So after you have went through the routine, and again, we're still just on that one word, and vocabulary, it does take a little bit of time, but it is so critical to break down each word in order for them to have that understanding. So you made sure that they can pronounce the word, you've given them what the word means, and then you've given them examples and non-examples of what that word is. So now it's time to check for their understanding to see, do they really know what an enemy is? So you can do that a couple different ways. One way is you can just ask them and say, Thor and Loki, are they enemies or not enemies? Batman and Robin, enemies or not enemies? And Ross and Gunther, I'm a Friends fan. Ross and Gunther, enemies or not enemies? Monica and Rachel. So, just give them examples, mix it up a little bit, and then they could say enemy, not enemy. And you just based on what they say, if they got that concept. Again, make sure that you know some of their background knowledge, what they're familiar with, so that you can use what they know to give examples to get that full understanding. Because if kids don't watch Friends, then they're not going to know who Monica and Rachel are, and so it's not going to help. Another way you could do that is just to give them some questions. If someone is your enemy, would they want good things to happen to you? And then have them elaborate on that. No, they wouldn't want good things to happen to me if they were my enemy. Well, why not? And then based on what they say, you will know if they truly understood what the concept of enemy is. And then the last idea that you could do, you can just generate their own examples or share out. So at the beginning, I gave them examples of Batman and Robin and Ross and Gunther. Okay, you give me an example. Give me an example of enemies. Okay, now give me an example of not enemies. And if they can give you examples and they're correct, then you know that they understand that concept. And you could do that they can write it, or they can share out in a group, or however you want to do that. And that's always fun. I like doing that. Okay, so now we have went through how to select which vocabulary words the students need. We have went through how to teach those words, and that routine. So now you've done that word enemy. Now you go to your next word that you have. Remember, you have 4 or 5. So that was word number 1. Then you move on to the next word, and you repeat those same 4 steps with the next word and the next word until you've covered 4 or 5. And so that same 4 steps with each word in order to know that they understand their vocabulary words. And once you've done that with all of those words, then you're ready to move to your writing and using those vocabulary words. Whoops, sorry about that. So reading and writing, we like to teach that together, and it's used together. So sometimes reading and writing are taught separately in classes, and sometimes they're taught together. So I want to talk just a little bit about why it's important to teach reading and writing together. It occurs naturally, first of all, in everyday life. If you're just well, right now, when people text a lot. So, we're not physically writing with a pencil, but we're still having to spell and that kind of thing, and put our words together in order to portray our message that we want to send. And then the receiver is reading that. So it's used together. We write emails, and then the person that we're sending them to, they read, and then you respond. So, our natural life is reading and writing together. And when you're, like literacy, when you're literate, it's reading and writing. And then when you are teaching students like letters and sounds and words and reading, we don't really A student has not considered to have mastery of a letter sound and knowing what letters and sounds or words are until they can read it and write it. So that's why we want to tie in reading and writing together. It they build on each other. Writing helps with reading comprehension. Reading comprehension helps with better writing performance. And then it just they have a higher level of thinking, overall thinking, and helps them just overall perform at a higher level. So the strategy that we're going to use today is from this book. It's called the Writing Strategies book by Jennifer Saravello. I love her. She's got a writing one, and then there's also a reading one that we use. Um, they're just they're simple, easy to follow, but yet they are very impactful. So that's why we like to use these. This one is called Write with Authority, using domain specific vocabulary, which leads right into what we had talked about. We had, based on our unit and our passage, we have picked our words. So you can use this for grades 1 through 8. And when I say grades 1 through 8, that doesn't mean like the physical grade they're in. So you may have some high school students that they may be functioning on a middle school level, and you could use that with them because the strategy it's not, um, you know, kitty like, so that it would be appropriate for older kids. When they're having to write nonfiction or opinion writing, you can help use this strategy with them. And it helps them to revise and just those drafting skills to come and make those. So, okay, so this is your strategy. What you're going to do, you have a sentence. You can put this, again, on a sheet of paper or um, whatever you're using, a board or whatever, and you're going to write. If you're writing about blank, then you can sound like blank by using blank, blank, blank. So what your ultimate goal is, you are creating this sentence frame, and you are going to plug in words, or help the students plug in the words. So the blanks at the end are going to be the vocabulary words that they used. So you can start out, you write out that with the blanks and say, okay, the first blanks we want to use are the end, and we're going to plug in our vocabulary words. So whatever those are, you're going to plug those in. For today's example, we're just going to use independence, allies, patriots, and then the word enemy, like we talked before with the routine. Okay, so if I use those words, independence, allies, patriots, and enemy, and also it may be, you will have the topic, because when you are in a small group setting, by this point, the topic has already been identified for the kid, by the teacher or whatever that you guys are working on. So you could probably go ahead and fill in the topic too. So for this example, we're going to be talking about the revolution. So you can go ahead and put in, we're going to write about the revolution, and then plug in your vocabulary words. So now you have them thinking, we're talking about the revolution and a person. So who would be an expert? So your goal is to have them think like an expert. So look at the prompts on the screen. So these are some words that are some prompts that you can give them to try to get their mind. You got to help them think a little bit. So we want to, you could say things like, what word would an expert use? Or what would an expert call that? So first, so a person that loves history and talking about the revolution, what is the expert person called for that? Okay, an historian. The historian is the expert, so we're going to plug that in. So that how it gets them going on that. And then again, once they have that filled in, you want them to start writing sentences. But again, you've got to have some background knowledge. So with depending on the topic of when you're working with your students. More than likely, you're going, like I said, you're going to have your topic already, and they have already discussed about that topic. So they're going to have a little bit of that background knowledge, and then you may have to remind them of that when you get to your small group. So for our example today, just very quickly, background knowledge, a revolution is when people revolt against the government because they're not happy with what's going on. And then more specifically about the American Revolution is when the American colonies went against Great Britain because they did not like how they were being taxed, and then that they didn't have any representation from their colonies. So they revolted against the British government, and it became the American Revolution. You didn't know you was going to get some social studies in there today, did you? So after you have background knowledge and you have your structure of the sentence and have them thinking like the experts, and you're using those prompts, you want to have them start writing sentences. So just for example, we want them to use specific language over general language. And this is why we, to look at these examples on the screen of how that impacts their writing, because overall we want them to sound authoritative in their writing, and when somebody reads their writing, we want the reader to think, wow, they really know what they're talking about, and they know how to express that in their writing. And we want them to sound like an expert and use that specific language. And just a couple of words can make all the difference in the world. So for example, really quickly, if we had some people wanted to be free from the British rule. Okay. All right. So then that's pretty general. So some things that you might could prompt them to get them more specific is to say, okay, so let's think about this American Revolution. Who wanted to be free from the British rule? What were the names of that group of people? Oh, it was the Patriots. Okay, so instead of saying some people, let's just tell the reader who it's going to be. Who are those people? It's the Patriots. So let's plug that in. The Patriots wanted to be free from British rule. Okay, well, let's think back about your vocabulary words. And you may have to go, look at those words again. Do we have a vocabulary word that means freedom or wants to be free or something that relates to that? Well, independence, great, perfect. So instead of saying be free, let's actually put that vocabulary word that you learned and put that in there. So independence is a higher level word than free, and it makes it sound higher level and more authoritative. So now we have the Patriots wanted to gain independence from the British rule. And see how different that sounds, and we just changed two different words. So and I'll do one more because it's got the enemy in it. I know we're getting close on time. Many of the colonists did not like the British government. Okay, again, who did not like the British government? The Patriots. Perfect. Let's put the name in there. Okay, they did not like the British government. Do we have a vocabulary word that talks about people not liking someone? Oh, enemy. Yes, enemy. So instead of saying they did not like them, let's just say they were enemies and put that in there. And now we have a new sentence of the Patriots viewed the British government as the enemy. So you notice the difference in that specific language versus general language. And a lot of times what happens is kids will, and I know you guys have seen this too, they'll say things or stuff. Okay, that's very general. So you want to prompt them and have, ask them questions and pull out, well, what things are you talking about? Be specific. And then that helps them put actual object, whatever they're talking about. And again, we know with our students, they have difficulty just coming up with sentences. So you may need some tools in order to help them get started with their sentences. And this is a scaffold, and a scaffold is like a support for those kids. And since we're talking about the American Revolution, these are just some social studies examples, and these are called sentence starters. And these could be very general and be applied to different areas. So, like for example, the cause of blank was blank. Well, you can use that in social studies or reading, with cause and effect, but that just kind of guides their thinking to where at first all they have to do is fill in the blank, and then when they can start thinking like that, then you're going to take that away. You're going to fade that scaffold and that support for them, and that way they may start writing their own sentences, and then and so the and then what that would lead to paragraphs, and then eventually essays. So you have to, but we, of course, we know we have to start with sentences. And again, there's just some other ones here, but you can just see that it's basically fill in the blank, but or like there's one it says is important because, so it gives them a middle part. Okay, what's important? And then they fill that in. Well, why is it important? And they put it on at the end, but it just helps guide their thinking. And then we talked about leading into paragraph frames. So now we have sentence starters and then paragraph frames. So you may have them, and it's the same concept as the sentence starters, except with this one, they're a little bit more open ended, and it encourages paragraph writing. So you would hand this to them, and then they would fill it in. So let's look, there's one example that's completed here. I just chose this narrative one. So the one on the left is the frame and these are graphic organizers, and that is a form that can be used for specially designed instruction when you instruct the child on how to use those graphic organizers. That's, you're providing the SDI for those kids. So then look at the right. And this is the completed part. The blue is what was on the frame at the beginning, and then the black is what the student has filled in. The title of the story was, and then they just put the title, okay? And then the setting, and then, and it leads them down, and it helps guide that writing, that thought into that paragraph. Like for example, it says, was the main character of the story. Okay, well, who was the main character? It was Wallace. So on that one, all I had to do was identify that Wallace was the main character. Okay, so what did you learn about that main character? And then that is when you can start getting into the students' creativity, because you may have a group of 3 to 4 students, and Wallace may have learned more than one thing. So it gets that student to start thinking about what they've read and be able to write something that they pulled away from that story and apply that, what they think Wallace has learned. And again, once they don't need that support anymore, you're going to take that paragraph frame away, and then they're going to be able to write their paragraph independently. Okay, so just a quick recap of what we've went through today. We've talked about the 5 components of reading and how they all tie in together to guide the ultimate goal of increasing students' comprehension. We have talked about a routine on how to select those vocabulary words for those students. And then we've talked about how to go through and instruct and teach those words to the kids to ensure that they know the meanings of those words. And then after they know the meanings of the words, then we've talked about how to apply it to their writing. Please email me at chasity.craft@theholler.org. I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So we just thank you for your time and your effort and what you do for our kids. Thanks.